le malheur des uns fait le business des autres هو عنوان الكتاب الصادر باللغة الفرنسية عن دار روبير لافون. اشتغل عليه زملاء أوروبيين تعاونوا مع درج خلال السنوات الماضية هن أنطوان هاراري وكليمون فايول ومعهم الصحفي بنوا فوكون. الكتاب حتى بالنسبة لصحفيين استقصائيين معودين على ملاحقة الفساد المرتبط بعالم الأعمال مش بس صادم ولكن أيضاً مستفز. الكتاب صادم لأنه على عكس أي تحقيق استقصائي مش مركز على موضوع واحد ولكن بيعطي فكرة واقعية عن ترابط عوالم الجريمة ببعضها. بفصوله 18 بيكشف عن أنواع مختلفة من رجال الأعمال من تجار السلاح والألماظ والمخدرات للجواسيس والمستشارين والمحامين اللي بيساعدوا على إلغاء وتجاوز العقوبات الدولية للدبلوماسيين العاملين بالظل والهاكرز وحتى حكام المصارف المركزية مثل حالة رياض سلامة اللي تخصص له ولمصرفيين لبنانيين فصل كامل. ببساطة الكتاب بيكشف كيف مدن حول العالم من جنيف وبروكسل ولندن وباريس لدبي والدوحة عم بتكون مراكز أساسية لهالأنواع من البزنس. يعني من الآخر الكتاب بيثبت شيء كلنا بنعرفه إنه بهيدا العالم ما في حدا بريء. بروسيا أو بالصين أو بالهند أو بإيران مثل بأوروبا أو الولايات المتحدة في رجال أعمال مرتبطين بمراكز القرار عم يعملوا بزنس صفقات بمليارات الدولارات. الضرر منها مش بس إنها بعيدة عن أي مراقبة وأي محاسبة ولكن أيضاً يمكن الأهم هو الأثر السياسي والاقتصادي والاجتماعي اللي بيترتب عليها. لهي الأسباب الكتاب في يكون أيضاً كتير مستفز لأنه بيطرح علينا سؤال جوهري. نحن كصحفيين استقصائيين منقضي أشهر وأوقات سنوات عم نلاحق تحقيقات ونكشف ونقاطع معلومات. شو الهدف من كل هالشي لما بنكون عارفين إنه أي محاسبة حتى بحال حصولها عم بتكون مجرد خدش ويمكن أقل ضد منظومة أو منظومات عالمية كاملة؟ السؤال اللي كلنا بنسأله لحالنا ليش منكفي شغل؟ هالسؤال وأسئلة تانية رح أسألها على ضيفي اليوم أنطوان هاراري. So Antoine, I'm going to start with you with the second part of the book, Money Has No Order, and in which you have dedicated the whole chapter for Lebanon, for the banking sector with a focus on two main personalities, Mr. Riyad Salemi and Mr. Marwan Khairuddin. Why did you decide to give a whole chapter for Lebanon and why the focus on these two particular persons?
Well, first of all, because with Clément, we worked a lot on this story of the downfall of the Lebanese economy, and also because we were fascinated by the difference between the actual population and the situation that they were living and the impunity of the bankers and how little they seem to care about the concrete effect of their policy. You had on one hand a high level of corruption and on another direct impact on the population. So it was a very strong case of crisis profiteers and people that make money out of other people's suffering.
In the context of the work you do, is that even exceptional?
I don't think it's exceptional, but I think it's exceptional in its kind of size, seeing how Lebanon is still a small country, and so the amount of the money that was we can say stolen or taken is huge in comparison with the Lebanese GDP. If I'm not mistaken, the Lebanese GDP is something like 50 billion or something like that, and so I mean the sums that are in the game are unprecedented, and also we could see how the IMF and other kind of foreign banks played along rather than trying to stop the catastrophe.
Actually, I wanted to ask you about that. You mentioned the first IMF report, and a part of that IMF report that you were able to see that I think many Lebanese are not aware of. And how surprising were the findings for you?
We were able to get through a source a first version of the report. And when we compared it to the second one, we were very surprised to see that there was about 14 pages that were missing, but also that some stuff had been kind of taken out of the IMF report. And one of the things was the concrete loss, the balance between what was inside of the central bank coffer and what they own and what they had to pay. And it was really weird to see that Riyad Salameh, who was seen as a great banker, as a magician, as a someone that had done very well during the subprime to save and help Lebanon, had still such power that he was able to convince the IMF and force them to change their report, because a lot of the warnings that were in the previous report would have helped for the actual crisis. So that was also the sad thing, which was that maybe this crisis, maybe it could not have been kind of completely avoided, but it could have been seen a bit before, and something could have been done to help and ease the people's burden. And especially one other thing that was very important was to see that, of course, it was something empirically we knew, which was that the common people had their money frozen in the banks, but all the bankers and all the people that were they were told before, and they were able to take away their money before anything happened. We didn't meet with Raja Riyad, but we were able to speak with their spokesperson, and we had people that knew them very well, that described them and told us a bit who they were. I think from what you can see from even the WikiLeaks cables and stuff like that, it's very interesting to see how the two brothers were playing different parts. One was the genius doing all the kind of mathematic and economical scheme, and the other one was the social one that would go and do the meet and greet and kind of show that do the kind of introduction. And so this is why from the start Raja and Riyad worked together. It was an enterprise that they set up, the two of them, and you can see it also with the whole Fori story. So this company that they set up, Raja is at the head of it, but Riyad gives the contract that makes it work. And what was very surprising as well is that we discovered that they had already done this with real estate as well. So from the early years, from the early 90s, as soon as Riyad becomes central governor, they start their kind of business on the side. So it's not something that he did after 10 years or 15 years in charge. From the start, when he started, they knew they had to make money, and they had to make money with real estate and other ways. And I think one of the most shocking we discovered is that when we saw that Riyad had himself banking accounts in the IM Bank, and that he was kind of profiting from his own decision in politics. The crazy part is that based on his politics, he decided on certain years where he wouldn't give interest, not to put any money, because he knew he wouldn't make any. And so you have here like such a conflict, such insider trading, I think is incredible. I haven't seen anywhere in other banking system. So the IMF has a huge responsibility in this, because in their report, they are saying basically there is a systemic risk in the Lebanese bank. They don't have enough cash flow regarding the politic they're acting, and that the rate of interest was way too high. And so, I mean, this is what is really upsetting, is that the IMF knew perfectly about it, and they decided for political reason not to do anything.
One of the red flags you also mention in the book is the large number of banks in Lebanon. And again, this is not very exceptional. Why do you think in the Lebanese context that was something that worries you as an investigative journalist?
I think what surprised us was to see how the banking sector was acting as one, and as everybody kind of understood that they had like a cartel, basically. They had to held together, and they could all profit of this if they were not to tell the kind of dirty secret, which was that the central bank was playing with fire, and that at some point the whole building or the whole country might burn. And people played along for a very long time. And this was the shocking part. I don't think the homogeneity of the banking system in Lebanon is the same in other countries. I mean, there you really had people that were all seated at the same table and decided together what they would do and what they would not tell to the public.
Well, I assure you, we've been working on the Salame case for years as well, and it has been one of the most fascinating stories to cover. But you know, years after all that work, there are arrest warrants against Mr. Salame as well. There's an open investigation about Marwan Khairuddin, another person you mentioned in your investigation. Both are in Lebanon, living the big life. What do you do with this?
So yeah, that was also one of the surprising elements about Lebanon, right? Is that normally you have the political power, they have the strength, and they go and tell the banking system or the judiciary, I want you to do this or that. In Lebanon, it's the opposite. It's the banking system that controls almost all of the rest. And so I think the problem with Salame is that he has so much information on so many different people that bringing him down would be very dangerous for a lot of powerful people. And so in that sense, he's protected because because no one is ready to take the risk of putting him down and having him starting to tell on everyone else.
You started the chapter with Marwan Khairuddin and an episode about him purchasing an apartment in New York, a penthouse in New York. Why did you open I mean, there are other bankers in Lebanon, and he is not the central bank governor, he's just a banker in Lebanon. Why did you decide to start the chapter with this scholar?
Because when we realized that it was the same guy that had allowed Salame to have private account in his bank, and that Salame was responsible of having saved Khairuddin's bank, who was really close to bankruptcy at some point. We thought it was an original way to show the impunity and the kind of corruption that was going on. Also, this apartment was bought at a time where the crisis had already started, and so you could see that he wasn't affecting a lot of people from the elite. There are also rumors about who would be the real owner of this apartment, but we didn't have enough proof, so we didn't go that far.
Look, in the same part of the book, which is the second part, there's a chapter about passports, and I know this was also part of a big investigation that was happening. Why a chapter about that?
I think it was important to show with the element that OCCRP had gathered and the consortium, that we were able to say, well, listen, in this case, in the Dominican case, there are this much criminals that actually used the Dominican passport to evade sanction, to flee, or to go and leave their country. And so it was an important element to show how this can be useful for someone that is a criminal. That was one thing. And then the second was the discrepancy between the actual population in Dominica, where you have about 70,000 people, and the numbers of passports that were sold, which we think are more than half of the population, at least 35,000, but probably more, were sold. And so you could see how this program had gone crazy, and how easy it was also to get a passport. And in this chapter, we also speak about a source of Clément, a Lebanese guy that had gotten a passport really easily, and he himself was telling us, well, listen, guys, they say they do background check, but the only thing they ask for is proof of an empty criminal file. But this is in a country like Lebanon. I pay a very little amount of money and I can fake it. So those are definitely not proof. And so it was interesting for us to show that, contrary to what those country and services say, there are no real due diligence for criminals. And in the case of Dominica, even if you do the due diligence, then when they go and they pay directly the prime minister, they still get the passport. So
also in that chapter you talk, I mean, we could go into the details, but I want to cover as much as possible of the topics you've covered. You talk about the people who become experts at diluting the impact of sanctions, basically shadow diplomats or facilitator or intermediaries who help overcome sanctions. When you see how, when we look at the general picture and we see how this is possible, what does that make you feel about sanctions in principle, even targeted sanctions?
One thing we need to remember is that sanctions are political. And so even if you look at the case of the war in Ukraine and with Russia, some Russian oligarchs are sanctioned, some not, or some areas, because sometimes you have economical interests of the countries involved in Europe or in the US, for example, with diamonds and Belgium, just to give a case. I think those sanctions don't work because the problem is that the middleman or the accountant that those people that are targeted, like big oligarchs or any kind of criminal, those middlemen are perfectly able to use all kind of fiscal paradise in different countries to hide their trace, and they've done that for a very long time. And so if you open a company in the BVI and then with that you use your Dominican passport and you open a bank account in Switzerland in the name of this company, you've already started to create a web of very difficult trace to find. And this is why every ICAG inquiry, like Panama Papers, Pandora Papers, and stuff like that, are very useful, because, okay, on one hand, people say, well, of course we knew they were doing this in Cyprus or in other countries, but until you actually get the documents, it's impossible to prove. We have cases where some oligarchs, for example, in France, are still denying that the house they bought is theirs, because it's very hard to find the actual evidence or the ultimate beneficiary owner, depending on where the company is based. And so I think it's a game of cat and mouse, and it's a bit like in the doping in sport. Every time the GAFI or anti-corruption offices come up with a new system, they find the criminals find a new way and move on. And
I mean, in a lot of ways, Antoine, this is the sense you get while reading the book. As you said, these are not things that we did not know. When we're working on an investigation, what's usually very exciting is that we are now capable of proving what we have known for the longest time. But again, it is a cat and mouse game, but you always seem to be 2 steps or 3 steps behind, because if you look at the examples, if you are an oligarch and then you have a very clean law firm in Geneva, basically managing your real estate, and then you have another company managing your business elsewhere and the business of your children, even if you're sanctioned. I mean, everything, all the tools that, or all the laws that have been improving since Panama Papers seem to be like, no matter what new guidelines are put to basically have some impunity, there's always also some new maneuvers being done in a system that is increasingly, first, there is a lot more money that is being invested in that, and it becomes much more complicated, as you said, because you uncover one part, but then the web is just so difficult to untangle. How do you? I think this is what one gets the most from reading the book. It's not because it tells us something we did not know. It's because it's bringing all of these very complicated investigations together and link all those investigations together as well. I think the question here is, why did you want to put all of those findings in a book as opposed to the investigations that you've already done?
I think this is what the Americans are trying to do now. When they sanction Swiss lawyers, Liechtenstein trustees, fiduciary in Malta, they're going like, okay, we cannot get the big fish because of the middlemen and the guys that we are describing in the book. So this is why we are targeting you now. And this came as a surprise, but there are more than 20 persons in Switzerland that are now under US sanction because of the Russian war. Of course, what is annoying is that Delaware is a fiscal paradise. So of course, Swiss guys say, well, why don't the US also do their job on their own territory? But that's a detail. I think that the idea of the book was to show that all of those professions, all of the jobs that we were describing in each chapter were very useful for criminals to keep doing their business. And that's the fact of taking advantage of a crisis is probably years or thousands of years old. But now with the globalization, it has increased a lot. And so for us, it was the idea to say, well, listen, we are trying to compile as much as we know on the different aspects of this web of people that take advantage of chaos. And we think it makes sense that it's in one book because they're all in some way connected to each other.
I want to go to the last part in the book where you have a chapter on Syria. You mentioned that, or you say that the Golden Syrian youth is not scared to show their faces. Why is that surprising? This is how oligarchs and their kids behave anywhere else in the world.
I think it was our colleague Benoît Faucon, because he was able to travel to some kind of a market of the kind of countries that we don't have we could call it like some kind of repression market, or at least somewhere where you could buy all kind of weapon and invest in reconstruction. And he was very shocked to see how prominent and how openly the Qatari family would kind of advertise themselves, even though they are under sanction, and that you think that if you're very closely linked to the Assad regime, you'd be keeping a low profile. And I think the idea was to show that, I mean, a bit in the same way where MBS was the worst criminal 2 years ago, and now everybody is going to the Red Sea Film Festival and watching Saudi Football League. I mean, with the right kind of money and the business proposition, you can kind of go over whatever reputation you had. And so the Qatari were interesting, I think, also for Benoît, to show how in the Assad regime there were changes of dynasty, right? Before you had the Mahlouf and those guys, then they kind of went down, and then you have other family that go up, but it's still an oligarchy, and everything belongs in the end to people close to the Assad regime. I think naively we thought those kind of things would change, and that Syria, or at least the Syrian war, had been so mediatized that that something would be different. But you're right. I mean, one of the things that people were telling us is, okay, you're telling us people are taking profit of crisis. Yes, it has been like that forever. I agree, but it doesn't mean that we don't need to talk about it, and that it doesn't need to be denounced. So yeah, I mean, it's sad that they're not the first to do it, but they're the one doing it right now, and I think it's important also that we don't forget where they come from, and what is the backbone of their group, because maybe in 10 years, in 20 years, they'll have been able to clean their image or something like that. And so this is important. This could be an important testimony.
Well, one of the points that could be a little bit surprising concerns the offsprings of Rami Makhlouf on one side, whose sons are doing big business, and also the offsprings of Asaf Shaukat, who was killed by the regime, and who in the book look like they seem to be at least doing okay. So was any of that surprising to you?
Yes, because in an Occidental way, you'd think that once a family is banned or whatever, they're gone out. And in reality, in Syria, it looks to be a bit more complicated than this. And so it doesn't mean that if the father or a part of the family has had a fallout with the Assad regime, then the rest cannot do business with them. And the thing is, with the reconstruction of Syria, there is big business to do for a lot of the oligarchs' family in Syria. It's actually quite a profitable time for them, sadly.
Actually, one of the person who seems to be on top of it all, Asal Assad, as you rightly mentioned, who's not before becoming first lady, was also a banker, not just any banker, a banker and an expert in fusions and acquisitions at JP Morgan. You compared her to the wives of other Arab leaders, but also how unique is her story, also because she's one of very few women that are mentioned in the book as actually as if this world of business is mostly a male dominated work. I mean, she stands out as a woman, doesn't she?
Yeah, I mean, it is a fact. Like it is a men world for now, which doesn't mean that no women are taking advantage or profiting of the crisis. But most of the characters and the worst one were always male. So that's why there is no gender equality in the book. But yeah, I agree. I think she's one of the few really powerful first lady, and she has taken over, as we describe in the book, a lot of very successful and important business, like the telecommunication and stuff like that. And I think people talk about some of the brothers like Maher, Assad, and stuff like that, but we shouldn't forget that the first lady has an enormous power in Syria.
Yeah, actually, I was personally not aware of the Mette investigation concerning Maher al-Assad. Agriculture and cultivation and normal export import that is also being used for Captagon trade.
I mean, Syria is really just ruled by one family and their kind of extension, some cousins, some people close to it, and they divided the roles and the business, and there are no dark area, like wherever you can make money, you will. And so, I mean, yeah, the issue with Syria is that I agree, we always think the worst of it, and so when we hear a new horror, people tend to say, well, yeah, of course, those guys are monsters, so why are you surprised? Yet it's still important to be able to document and say, well, yes, they are monsters because it is for that and that reason, and this is why they are ruining the country, rather than just making kind of documented affirmation. And it's, yeah, again, it's the same with the Panama Papers, when people are saying, oh, of course we knew rich people were hiding money. Yes, but now we're telling you where and how.
Actually, this takes me back to the beginning of your book and the first part, where you're mostly dealing with kind of businesses that are borderline. They might be unethical somehow, they might be secretive in a lot of ways, but they're not illegal. And most of the time they are also taking place under the supervision and in a lot of ways in coordination with governments, with authorities, etc. When we're talking about these facilitators, whether they are arms dealers, whether they are any kind of, I mean, you explain in the book the difference, how things changed over the decades, how this kind of business has changed. But at the bottom line, these are necessary individuals to get business done for governments in times of wars as well as in times of peace. How can we talk about any sense of accountability within this, with this knowledge and within this context?
I think sadly there is none, or very little. And the problem is that a lot of people will try to kind of rationalize what they're doing, saying, well, you know, like if you're doing, for example, PR or lobbying for dictators, or, you know, we have a chapter on that. And then the guy said, yeah, of course, but I never do it with someone that does sexual abuse or stuff like that. Everybody puts his limit or the red line where they want. But the reality is that you are helping very dubious individual to clean their reputation and kind of be able to sit at the powerful table longer when you're helping a dictatorship, trying to minimize the human rights abuses and stuff like that. So you are playing a role as a bad actor. You might not see yourself like this, but you're part of the problem in a way. And it's the same for a lot of, for example, lawyers or Swiss banking experts that are doing what we call not typical activities, like setting up companies in the Panama, in Panama or other countries. Like, of course, it's very indirect, but when you're helping people or corrupt people to hide their money, which is something that belongs to the state or to a country, you are a facilitator, you are an enabler, and so you played a role in this, and this was why we thought the book was important.
But that's a very important point, Antoine, because in the work that we do, we actually meet people, and you believe that they really think that they are not doing anything wrong. They really see themselves in somehow genuine way that they are doing their jobs, whether as lawyers, whether as bankers, etc. They're not breaking any laws. They are bound by whatever the law permits them to do.
I realized, speaking with, for example, lawyers in Switzerland that were suddenly found under US sanction for helping oligarchs, they really saw themselves as the victims, and they really don't understand why they are now targeted, because they feel they've just done their job, which was to represent some companies, and that's it. And so I think a conversation on the role and the importance of facilitators, of enablers, is really important, and especially in Switzerland, when you have all those people providing services but pretending not to see what those services will be used for. And so yes, I think it's very important to have this conversation on the responsibility of those financial service and those people that are providing shelters for those criminals.
Well, another conversation that I think is very interesting, and it goes in the, I think, the early chapters in the book, when one of the hackers, I think you've been talking to, mentions, says an expression that there is nothing called journalism. You either are doing journalism but don't have the resources to basically make your findings heard, or known to the large public, or you have a lot of resources and then you're doing everything else but not journalism. First, when you hear that, you decided to put that in the book, but you're journalists yourselves. And I know that this is something most freelance journalists, independent journalists deal with day in, day out. There is a lot of truth to that. If you're doing good journalism, you're most likely doing a very expensive job with very little resources. Where does that put you as journalists?
I think it's a job you have to do until you have the kind of passion and some kind of naive or idealistic view that you're gonna change a little bit of the world. If not, you should do something else. But I also think it's a very fulfilling job, but it's a bit like Sisyphus, you know, like every time you come out with an article and then 2 days later people have completely moved out and you have to start all over again. And it's kind of it can be tiring, of course. But I think until I think that we can make a bit of a change, I'll do it, and then maybe after I'll do something else. But no, I mean it's difficult, but it's also very fulfilling because you feel like you're on the good side of history, at least for now, and so that's at least you have a good conscience.
Well, I want to ask you, in this chapter about the hackers, your source mentions that the dark web is for the amateurs. First, I found that surprising. Did you already know that?
I mean, this is what he was saying. I mean, this guy was an expert of infiltrating emails, inbox, and all kind of stuff. Now it's a bit harder with the double authentication, like Gmail, and all those companies have improved. But I think that those guys that have knowledge of coding and how to set up an attack, they feel they don't really need to go to the dark web to get what they need. It is true that my informatical knowledge being very basic, I still find the dark web very useful. But I can understand that if you have the capacities already in-house, you might not be able, or not need to go and see leaks or any kind of information on the dark web. I also think that he was working for the Indian government at some point, and so there we're more talking about dark ops and kind of neutralizing targets that are seen as like enemies of the Indian state, and this might entail much harder actions and way of acting on someone.
Actually, one of the examples in the chapter, you talk about the case of Farhad Hazima, and you show how in some cases the same person who's a victim in one situation is also a perpetrator, and like people who are against each other are using pretty much the same tools to go against each other. How often, like in this world where everybody is using all the tools available to basically take their enemies down, it becomes a little bit complicated. But how easy is it to navigate a story when you know that even the victim on that side is not a victim? We've seen that, for example, in the Abu Dhabi secrets, in repetitive investigations. Even the victim is not completely innocent in a sense. How easy is it to navigate such stories?
I think in a way I find it easier in the sense that if there are no good guys in the story, I find it more believable when you have like a whistleblower that comes with a good heart and clean hands, you know, an angel face, it's always a bit dubious. I think with the work as an investigative journalist, as you know, you tend to become cynical. So I'd rather see the failure and the flaws of the victim and kind of understand what's in it for him. So that's one thing. The other, I think, is that for people having money now using like all those intelligence firms, they started realizing that hacking was just a very faster way to get whatever information on your enemy, and that following people in the street and taking their garbage wasn't really the best way to do it. It was kind of like the detective of the past. And this is the kind of change happening in the industry, which is that they have to be able in some way to offer some kind of hacking techniques or stuff like that, even though it's completely illegal. So they always in this gray area, and they will tell you that it's very well regulated, but we saw it with the Abu Dhabi secret, that at least in Switzerland, but also in England, and now you have many cases in the US, it's not. Like people used to do whatever they wanted and hire all kind of Indian hackers, because that sometimes India was the leader in this.
Before we wrap up, you've traveled a lot for this book, for the investigations, or for this book. How did your impressions about the regions you've visited, the part of the world you've been to, shape you as a person, as a journalist, as an investigative journalist?
I think one of the places that had the most impact on me was Malta, because I came after the Caruana murder, and it's such a small island, and so many stuff were happening because it was such a like the main route in the Mediterranean, that you could see all kind of traffics, drugs, Libyan oil, migrants, and so it was fascinating to see this kind of small island of pirates also dealing with passports, kind of experimenting the ways of just making money out of being trying to be smart and not really concerned with ethics or morality, at least for some of the people that were involved. And so when we met some of for example, the Maltese fishermen that have been in the heart of all kind of traffic. So yeah, Libyan oil, but also, for example, they're the one that helped some Russian ship to get fuel while they were going to Syria. And so you see those guys that seem like small characters, but have an international role. They were also falsifying tuna's provenance. I mean, like, so in fishing, they're also very involved. And so seeing that in such a small place was very impressive and very informative, I think.
So do you ever get the feeling that you've seen it all, nothing's going to surprise you anymore?
No, not really, because every time you think you've seen it all, there's a more absurd story that comes out. So
that's the most fascinating part about this job, I think. It keeps making the surprises bigger.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest thing is, like, so many times, literally in a lot of story, you think, okay, if I had written this up, nobody would have believed it. This is so crazy. This makes absolutely no sense. And yet we have the proof to document it. So that's one of the things I find fascinating, is that very often the reality is way weirder than whatever fiction work we would have come up with. The idea was really to show how all of those crisis profiteers were kind of connected somehow, and the kind of globalization of those facilitators and their really important role. You know, someone told us, another journalist, but the problem with your book is most of the people are not known. Well, that was kind of the idea. We wanted to introduce you to all kind of characters we met during our report, and show what could have been either their drive, or how they also saw themselves. It wasn't the idea to be moralizing and kind of judging them more than what was needed.
This takes me very much to my last question, and this is something you start your book with and you close it with, and it's basically raising the question of why you keep doing what you're doing.
I do it out of conviction, and I think that it is frustrating, and sometimes you feel like you're hopeless, but the amount of lawsuits and legal threat we receive makes me believe that we are doing important work, because it is annoying a lot of powerful people. Maybe not as much as it should be. Maybe they won't face justice at some point or whatever. But I think that the pressure and the increased pressure that has come up on investigative journalists, and some of us CCRP colleagues have even paid that with their life, is because they are a problem. They are like a rock in the shoe of a lot of powerful people, and this kind of work of watchdog of the democracy is key, and you see it so many times in great investigation that can kind of completely destabilize or have government to quit because of the impact of the scandal. So I think this is one of the most important part of journalism, and now ever more than we have too much information. You need this kind of news or reports to kind of tell you, okay, this you should read because it will impact you, because it has an impact on people in your country, or even in the world. And so I think that the fight should go on, and I also think that the collaboration between journalists has never been greater. And so this is we all know there is competition, but there is but still, never have we had more journalists working together, and this is a great thing.
Absolutely. I think I belong to the generation where the idea of having journalists belonging to different organizations working with each other was like out of question. And today you have ICIJ, you have OCCRP, you have IC, and I think what's key in the success of most of these investigations is the collaborative work and what everybody brings to the table. So with that, I say congratulations. Are you going to translate the book?
We don't know yet. We will see with the editors what they decide.
Okay. So congratulations on the book and on the work, and thank you for being with me.
Thanks a lot, Alia.